Hey, what's going on? Todd Shaw with another episode of the Sawdust Dude. Oh yeah! Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it so much. Man, I wish somebody had showed me this stuff years ago, because I tell you what, it's like boom! Hey, let's get ready to learn some tips that will improve your skills. Awesome. Let's get started. In this video, we're kind of going over measuring, marking, and cutting. So let's start out with boom, tape measures. Yeah, I've got, like, in my shop, I've got 3 tape measures that I kind of leave laying around, but are they all the same? You know, you'll have different tape measures. One that's so old, I don't know how long this one is. This one is brand new that I just got for Christmas. It's a 35-footer. And then this Stanley, that's a 25-foot tape measure. So you got different tape measures. But like this old fella here, how do I know how long this tape measure is when the label's scratched up and beat up? A lot of times, if you'll look right here on the beginning, and it says right there, 25 foot. Here's a Stanley, 25 feet. So when you have an old tape measure and it's still good, but you don't know how long it is, just check the beginning of the tape, and it'll have it on there. Hey, let's check this out though. But when you're using multiple tape measures in the shop and even on the same job, you want to make sure that they measure the same exactly, because sometimes there can be a little variance in it. When you're using multiple tape measures on the job site or even in your woodworking shop, you want to make sure that they both measure the same. Easiest thing to do is just take your square, make a straight line at 12 inches, pull out your tape measures. Do they line up? Oh yeah, that's a good tip. Hey, which tape measure should you use? Well, you know what? It's whatever you're comfortable with. If you're like me and you need readers all the time, maybe get one with bigger numbers on it. Well, obviously you can see the one in the middle. That's the one I like now because it has big numbers on it. But once again, is it easy to read? And that's just a big thing. There's another thing about tape measures. A lot of people just kind of look like it. It's just kind of confusing. Well, don't let it overwhelm you. It's pretty simple. Once you see they're all the same until they get to 12 inches. And then you'll notice it goes 13, 14. Obviously, numerically, it's going up the scale. But also on the top of the tape measures, you'll see a red 1, 2, 3. And basically what you do, you convert, instead of doing the inches, you go to feet and inches. So that'll be 1 foot, 1 inch, 1 foot, 4 inches. So instead of 14 inches, you may call out 1 foot, 2 inches. And so it goes on. Every measures kind of have a standard they go by, and you'll see certain marks on a tape measure. What do all those marks mean? Well, it depends on whether you're doing woodworking or what type of carpentry you do. If you're a framer, some of these marks are just really for frame carpenters. From here, you notice this box with the 16 on it right there, and that'll go to 16 and 32. So every 16 inches, you'll see a red box like that on your tape measure. Every 16 inches, there has to be a stud. That's code. Here's another one. If you're sitting around and you're playing carpenter or Trivial Pursuit, hey, what does this little mark mean? I hear a lot of guys ask, what's that little black diamond on the tape measure? Hey, it's not that hard. What I'm talking about here, you'll see, is at 19 1/4 on both of these tape measures. 19 1/4, you come up another 19 1/4, and there's that tape measure again. And it'll go all the way up, and it's kind of hard to see. Here it is. And we're going up another 19 1/4, and here it is all the way up to where it gets at 96 inches or 8 feet, and there's a little black diamond tucked up in there. The reason that works out that way, that's if you have a truss system. So a truss is just a fancy, instead of you doing the framing, it's a truss system that you lay out. And so instead of every 16 inches, it's every 19 1/4 on center. And so that works out all the way to the 8 foot, because a sheet of plywood is 4 feet by 8 feet. And that way, that sheet of plywood lays out on that truss system. That's what the black dots are for. The things that you obviously want to do is learn how to read a tape measure. I tell you what, boy, it's like the lead carpenter. If you want to hear him come unglued, we had guys, instead of like they didn't know 16th, and so they would call out ticks. So every 16th, and they would say, yeah, it's 27 and 7 ticks. You mean 27 and 7/16? Get out of here, boy. It's just real simple. Just remember, in an inch, there are 16 sixteenths, and all that together breaks down to 1 inch. And so halfway, a half of an inch is 8/16. So if you can remember that, because a lot of guys get hung up on the mark before a half inch and the mark after a half inch. And so if 8 is the middle, one before is 7/16, and then one after is 9/16. So always remember 6/16 in the middle is 8. And in your mind, you can kind of work through all that. You know, I wasn't really good in math either, but you know what? I could do fractions for some reason. And it's all about little tricks, and I'll take numbers and break them down and divide them up and then add them back together. So it's whatever really works for you. Another good tip for breaking down a fraction, if you have to say, what's half of 3/4? Well, here's an easy way to do it. So if you've got 3/4 here, if you take this bottom number, the denominator from here, if you double that, so that would be 3 times 2, that 4, it'd be 8. So half of 3/4 is 3/8. Let's do a tough one. Let's say, let's do 7/8, because a lot of times you really don't do, a lot of times you don't do 30 seconds, but what's half of 7/8? Well, you know, 2 more 16ths would be 1 inch, but what's half of 7/8? Well, that's real easy. So we take that, 8 times 2 is 16. So half of 7/8 is 7/16. Great way of dividing fractions. How do you get half of fractions? Well, you just take that bottom number, double it up, boom. Leave the top number, that's your half. Hey, since we're talking about measuring, marking, and cutting, hey, let's talk about marking. So when we're talking about pencils, and that's the way to go. You see guys using Sharpies and things like that. No. Silly boy. Nah, you don't want to use a Sharpie on a job site. Always keep some pencils with you. So do I use a number 2 or do I use this funky carpenter's pencil? Well, there's an advantage to both of them. The good thing about it, they're kind of flat looking. And so if you're on a house and you drop your pencil, that's pretty simple right there. But probably the biggest thing that you want to do with your pencils, as far as when we're talking about measuring and marking, is that you always have a good sharp tip on there. You know, a lot of guys will take a utility knife and kind of whittle away at the end of it, and that really is not the best way to do it, especially if you're a trim carpenter or if you're doing woodworking or fine woodworking. You'll see that a lot of those guys use a round pencil just because they can get a finer point on it. So really, if you're doing framing, that type of work, you know, the carpenter pencil has a little bit bigger tip on it or a bigger lead on it, even though you can sharpen that down. But you'll see finished carpenters and woodworkers a lot of times use a smaller number 2 pencil. They can get a finer tip on it. Always like this is a Cobalt product, but it does for carpenter pencils and number 2 pencils. But remember I was talking about putting a fine tip on it? This one's even got a little file. And when I took drafting in high school, we had little pieces of sandpaper so that you could get a nice fine tip on your graphite or on your lead. So always keep a good tip on there. When we're talking about doing marks and different types of pencils, these type of mechanical pencils just never really have worked out well for me, just because the graphite is so thin on it and it breaks so easily. They do make a nice close fine mark, but from in here, so here's my number 2 pencil, and I always want to make sure that I'm marking, you know, kind of hold my pencil at an angle so it's getting in there and not pushing away. Because if I just put my pencil against here, you can see there's almost an 1/8 of an inch difference. So that you hold your lead kind of to the side and then mark this way. A nice even mark. You don't have to bear down on it, just big enough to see. method. So how do you make a mark? How do I know where to cut? So from in here, say we want to do 17.5 inches. I come in here and I'm gonna take the tip of my pencil and I'm just gonna kind of make a V. Some guys call that a crow's foot. So you want to make sure, because if I were to walk away or another guy was cutting this and I just did a straight line, well, do I cut here or do I cut here? Where do I cut? With the crow's foot method or with the V method, you know you're always going to cut at that very point right there. And so what you do, you take your pencil, sit it here. I'll take my square, butt it up to it, and then very lightly make my mark. And every time that'll work out. And that's called a crow's foot. So we've got our measurement, we've got our mark. I'm ready to cut my board, so let's go. Wait a minute there. There's more to it than that. The question is, do I cut before the line? Do I cut the line out? Or do I cut after the line? Well, let's clear that up. The best way to show this is let me really over-exaggerate what I'm talking about here. So let's take my tape measure, and from in here, let's say I want to do a cut that's 15 inches long. I do my crow's foot from in there. Okay, got that out of the way. Take my square, and I'm gonna put my pencil down just like we talked and bump my square up to here, making sure everything's good and square. And so I'm gonna make my line right at 15 inches, doing the best I can with this dry erase board here. So over here, I've got 15 inches, and that's what I want. There's two little marks that indicates 15 inches, okay? So what I want to do, so let's say this 1 by, and this is 1 3/4. Let's just say this 1 by is my blade, and the thickness of a blade is called a kerf, K-E-R-F. Now this is over an exaggeration, okay, but this is to prove a point. So do I cut on the left, in the middle, or on the right? Well, here's where it makes a difference. And I'll use a different shade of pen here. So let's say I cut to the left and I've got the thickness of my blade and I can see my line on the right side and I make my cut. So remember, I needed 15 inches. So all of a sudden, I've got 13 3/8. The thickness of the blade made a difference. So if I cut on the left, you can see that I lost quite a bit of my stock and my material. So let's cut, let's just say in the middle, and I'll eyeball this. And so we cut again. So our first cut was 13 3/8. And that was too short, obviously. So from here, I've got 14 1/4. Because I cut on the line. And the thickness of my blade made that much of a difference. Now when you're doing construction work, especially framing or something like that, and a guy will call out 15 inches and leave the line. Well, that's what we're doing with our saw blade. We're coming where that kerf hits right at the edge there, and even perhaps leaves a little bit, because we don't need 14 and 15/16. So I'm going to come over here and make sure my saw blade kind of leaves that. And so when I look at it, and then I've got my 15 inches. And in fact, this is just a little bit more, it's about 15 1/16, which brings out a good point. I'd rather have 15 1/16 when my dude needed a 15-inch board. Well, if I gave him a 14 and 7/8 board, it's too short. So when you're running trim, that's real important that you always kind of cut to the right of the line. Even if I got to come back and saw a little bit more off, at least I have the material that I can do that instead of cutting it short. So when I cut to the left, I had 13 3/8. When I cut in the middle, 14 1/4. And then when I cut to the right of the line, then I came up with my 15 inches, and that was our goal. Well, hey, cool deal. Thanks for watching. I think this is going to be my next Christmas card. Hey, it all comes down to this. It's about learning better skills for better results, and that's what the Sawdust Dude, oh yeah, is all about. Appreciate you watching. Oh, I'll see you real soon.